Yeah. Oh, 1 minute or yeah. Perfect. Lina, it's so nice to have you here.
Thank you.
You are a porn performer and director. You were on TEDx speaker and educator at Sex School Hub, and it's so
Mhm.
happy. I'm so happy that you are here and that you can talk with us about different topics. But first of all, maybe you can introduce yourself better than I do. So maybe the stage is yours to a little introduction of yourself would be great.
Thank you. Well, as you said, I am a porn performer and director. I would say those are the two things that I would consider most of what I do, but I think also sex education is a big part of it as well. I am based in Berlin. I am originally from Mexico. I started doing pornography 7 years ago. Most of what I have done has been in the sphere of porn performing, but I have also done some directing, and I'm very much looking forward to moving into that direction. I think that also as part of doing porn, I began to also get involved into questions of sex education. Many people within our industries and communities can also think a lot about the educational potential, of this line of work. So that's how like it kind of like naturally took this flow. And additionally to those things, I write occasionally. I create some screenings as well. And I also talk, as in like a TEDx talk. And all the topics that I am involved with are mostly pornography, sex education, feminism, explicit sexuality, and culture.
Thank you so much. And those are all the things which you said that why we chose you to be on our
Mhm.
guest on our podcast,
Thank you.
as well as YouTube Live, because I love what you're doing. And I think education is so important. And you're like one of the activists there. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
And maybe we go on the education topic a little bit later, but maybe you can
Mhm.
tell us how and why did you start in the sex industry and can like elaborate a little bit on that.
Mhm. Well, I started here in Berlin. The way in which I started, it's a very funny one because I mean, it wasn't part of my life plans or like my dream career, to be a porn performer. It's something that just came to my mind one day. Here in Berlin, there's this porn film festival that has been going on for some time already. And thanks to that festival and to attending the screenings and so on, I was able to see the work of directors, and films that had what seemed to me at the time a more diverse take on pornography. And I don't know, and watching all those films and watching all the directors talk about their work and so on, in so many ways seemed something that was kind of close in a way. Like I watched those films, I listened to those people talk about their work, and I was like, ooh, I think I can do it. And yeah, and I didn't really give much thought to it actually. I mean, in my life, I was also at a moment in which I was working and so on, but the kind of work that I had was something that was not really, that was like not really something meaningful, or even stable, So I was like, okay, maybe I think I can afford giving pornography a try. And I did it in a very slow way. I was like very careful. I got in touch with a couple of directors. I had a couple of coffees with them. They explained me many things about how they work, how can the industry function, and so on. And after thinking about it, then I decided to go for it. And I did it the first time, and I took it really slow for during my first year, and then for the second year, I started a bit more intensively and convinced that this was not a bad idea after all.
Mhm. That's so interesting. I think for our community as well as for me, it's really interesting on how you like come into the space and what you think about it. because
Hmm.
because I think like in some ways it's like porn industry is kind of bad viewed in some terms. And I think it would really helpful, or for me really interesting, if you would tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of being part of the porn industry. And I think you especially bring an awesome and fresh positive touch to it, so thank you
Hmm.
for that. But what makes you think, or still believe, being in that industry, like some pros and cons of being part in the industry would be perfect.
Well, I think that's a very good question because I mean I will start with the cons, and I will say there's a lot of cons, you know, uh, considering that the porn industry or any industry that has to do with sex work or explicit sexuality are per se taboo industries. I mean, we're right now like sitting here and having a nice conversation and so on, but there's like many people who think the worst, you know, from the porn industry, from the people who are part of it, and the many cliches and the many myths that come with it. So unfortunately, all this amount of cliches are part of like this very large stigma, you know, that exists around our work, you know, and our lives. So in that sense, the cons are have to do a lot with questions of censorship, you know, from being on social media to being able to set up a business, you know, and the business having like a massive extra high cost just because you're dealing with taboo. Um, and questions of maybe deciding doing pornography having severe consequences for someone in their personal life. Let's say if you do porn, then forget about, I don't know, teaching for children, you know. If you do pornography and you have kids and so on, maybe you can, in extreme cases, you can have like those kids taken away, you know, or having, I don't know, uh, I think that's also like coming to terms with the question that once you do pornography, your image will be out there on the internet in ways that you cannot control, you know? Because it's a stigma, it's not something like, oh, like I just saw you on TV. It's like, oh, I saw you in this YouTube channel, on this like tube channel, and yeah, things not being that nice potentially. So I don't know. I think that in many ways, the burden of the stigma can be very big, can be like sometimes very tiring, you know. Also in the sense that because of how difficult things are in many ways, many people who decide to do pornography, even though they like it, they do not last long in the scene because it's just so difficult. It's in terms of money and so on, it can be really precarious, you know, in terms of if you want to set up a business, like the costs can be really prohibitive, you know, or like maintaining a platform, maintaining a project takes a massive amount of work, dedication, and determination, you know. And in so many ways, it's just that surviving, you know, as a porn performer or as a sex worker in general, it's a very difficult and serious thing.
Mhm.
And also at the same time like having your work misunderstood all the time, you know, um, even when you do like things on a more like artistic side and so on, like the kind of support that you could get, you know, as a more traditional artist, you know, you just don't get it if it comes to porn. Like your
Mhm.
work is just not deemed as something that deserves any kind of support whatsoever. So, so I would say like the cons are there's a lot, there's many cons and they are very big, you know. And I'm not gonna lie, like every now and then, like I just like I have to remind myself like why am I still doing this? This is so this is so difficult. Like why am I still here? And then the question is that in on the other side, the cons, at least for me, of doing porn is the fact that um, and I think that my pros in that sense can be really personal. I do really believe in what I do. I do really believe that pornography it's a very, very creative medium, you know, for expressing ideas about sex, about sexuality, about culture, about feminism, about politics, about everyday life, about intimacy, about even education, you know. I think that it's one of the very, very few sexually explicit products and media that exist out there. And I do think it's very important for everyone because we are here because of sex, you know. Everyone is either sexual or not sexual for one reason or another, you know. And as individuals, as humans, we're all very complex and very unique, you know. And it's important to have a work out there that perhaps can represent people, but work there that talks about it, you know, that can help us come to terms with many things about ourselves, or just simply admire some others, like have some entertainment, you know, like have some pleasure even. I think it's all of these things that pornography can be are really important, you know. It's very funny that people always see pornography as this kind of like frivolous, superficial, even trashy thing. But if you think about it, the more you think about it, the deeper you go about it. So I personally, I believe in all of these things. So this is why I'm into it. Also, another very personal thing that I take from pornography is the many things that I have learned from it. The many things that being a performer, being on set, working with other people, being in certain spaces, you know, that did open me with sex and sexuality have helped me personally a lot in the ways in which I see myself as a sexual being, the ways in which I live my sex life and my own sexuality. That that I don't know. I have learned a lot from it. I have learned a lot from other people. I have valued, you know, all these things a lot more um, compared to what society tells you that sex is, especially if you are a woman, you know, or are like a marginalized body, which you don't count, your body don't count, your desires don't count, all those things. You It helps you to reclaim them in so many ways. So I think that, and this goes more in a general way, the ways in which pornography can touch people, the ways in which pornography can reach and make people not only have a good time, but also have deeper reflections about themselves and their bodies and their sexualities. I think that's something that can be really important about what we do. And many some of the things that can make all like this big super difficult cons, like at the end it's like, okay, yeah, this is the thing, you know. And finally, for me, like the pro is that I really like to I really like cameras. I really like to perform. I really like for me, performing is something that I truly enjoy, and so that's what I do it as well.
Thank you so much, Lina, especially for talking about your personal experience and personal topics. I think it's
Thanks.
really, really great for everyone to know this and to like reflect on this and say, hey, why is it still a taboo topic? And it can be educational wise, as you said, or like you said, I remember something you said in the TEDx talk, which was like,
Mhm.
an irony that no matter where we go, sex just seems to be everywhere, but still the
Exactly.
conversations that we have about it are kind of difficult sometimes. And
It is.
um, it is, and we in the People Pleasure Society we are always like running onto walls, and everyone is like, no, it's a taboo topic. You cannot talk about it on social media or in public or whatever. You have to find a way around that, and you can. But maybe one question I have is like, do you think this bad view on porn industry or in general sexuality and sex is because of our or has to do with sexual education? And maybe you can also tell us a little bit more about how you experience your own sexual education and how did this shape you in the whole industry?
Mhm. I mean, definitely, I do think that sex education, or maybe the lack of sex education, plays a big role. That's one thing. Another big thing, it's definitely the censorship that exists, that blocks certain conversations, that blocks many debates. It's not just about like the freedom of to watch porn. It's also about like what kind of conversations uh, can happen through it. And censorship, it's big, and it comes not only from governments but also from corporations. So it's like this very big thing. And I think also like certain society values that we can have as society, that some like just like this like long held beliefs that maybe they could do with like some upgrade and some like update, or like that could reflect, the times that we live in. So I think that those three things are very big and very valid, and and yeah, definitely I think that sex education could be a lot better. Sex education could also discuss subjects that go beyond pregnancies, um, teenage pregnancies, or all like these horrendous STDs, scare stories, and could talk a little bit more about life, and that's also about
About
how we feel,
pleasure.
about pleasure, about life, about questions of even questions of body image, about gender relations, about the politics of gender relations, about sexual diversity, and definitely pornography, Like everyone these days has, and people from very, very young age have access to pornography these days, whether we like it or not. And I think there's more harm than good when like all like these conversations are just shut down. I definitely think that people, to be able to watch pornography, you require certain education. Otherwise, you will end up believing whatever it is that you see on the screen that perhaps is mostly about a fantasy, things that maybe don't happen in real world.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think what we learn like in school is always about like how to not get pregnant or like to avoid certain diseases or whatever. And not about like what you already said, like we everyone has sex and let's talk about how good it can be, how we can be careful, of course, but as well
Hmm.
as what you said about life and pleasure. And I think
Hmm.
that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and it's yeah. Sorry. No, no, no.
no, no worries. I just want to like because I have
Mhm.
so many questions, but please
Mhm.
go if you want
No,
to
yeah,
share
it
some.
was. I just wanted to like say like yeah, like when you hear like it's all like about it's like halfway, like some very very cherry picked topics about how your body functions, and then all these other layers of complexity that exist around sex and sexuality that may are just like left aside. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
that's.
totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And would you say that you had like a different like sex education like in early days because you're now very open and like positive about those things? Or would you say no, I think that I had to like educate myself.
I definitely think I was yeah, definitely the victim of the of the terrible sexual uneducation, I for me my sex education was like this like horrible stories, horrible pregnancies, STDs, and end of story, and definitely many things I just had to learn along the way, I would say that yeah, like my path was like sometimes like through experiences, that sometimes were good or were bad, about having like sometimes like these very pressing questions, but not really knowing, like, oh my God, I want to know this. I'm very embarrassed to ask, but I really need to know, about how my own pleasure work, about how my own body works. There were many things that I really didn't know, I mean, when I like think back into my early years and so on, and I come to realize, about like the age in which I was, how how my sexuality was, in my early years and so on, and how could I have benefited, how could I have how I could have profited, from it, if I had known things in a more clear way. I don't
Hmm.
know if that makes sense. And in so many ways, I think that the internet, can be like a very, in many ways, I received like all the rest of my education through the internet, like asking questions, like, oh, like there's like this website or like this institute for sex and sexuality. And so, well, I'm just gonna shoot them this question because I cannot know, I'm still like super embarrassed, about asking about orgasms, or things like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is so, um, yeah. So it was, yeah, my story was like that. And eventually, I think that also there's like no specific age, in which you learn everything, you graduated. I think that everyone can be educated about sex and sexuality throughout their entire life. I do not think there is an expiration date. I do not think that you just like get get the amount of or like the bunch of things that and then by I don't know 18 or 20, I don't think so. I think that we can learn about sex and sexuality from the rest of our lives. Also because our bodies, our lives change and evolve, and there's always something that we can learn. So for me, I think it should be something that it's like continuously ongoing.
Yeah, I so agree with everything you said. I think there's no expiration date on basically anything, and you can learn like until you die. And that's amazing. I think especially with sex or with pleasure or with your body,
Hmm.
as you said, it evolves and you can learn a lot from it during the years. And Mary, when we are into education right now, what can you say? Like, how can porn be transformed into education? Maybe that's also like, with your experience, how can we use porn to educate ourselves? Maybe even.
Hmm. Well, there's many ways. I think that as such, there's so many things that one can learn from pornography, and there's also many different angles. Uh, I think that first of all, understanding what pornography is and what is not, it's already an educational subject. There is indeed pornography that it's mostly made to cater like a certain amount of fantasies, something that perhaps not doesn't happen in real life because, well, fantasy implies as such that it's not real, I think that it sounds like very elemental, but it's a very important thing to bear in mind because many people just conflate what it's like real and what's not real, in porn, and that's what something that can cause many problems, So I think that's a very, very, very important thing to bear in mind, and once you know that, then you are learning something, so you are educating yourself about, oh yeah, this looks good, this looks hot, but maybe I shouldn't be doing that, in my real life. Having said that, there is out there pornography and pornographic directors and performers, both from mainstream or from alternative niches, that have already took upon themselves to create educational content as such, as a guide to how to do a blowjob, how to have a threesome, how to fisting, many things, many topics have already been explored by porn folks with the very, very intentional and exclusive educational angle. So there you go. There's something more. I think that in many ways there's porn that is very intentional as well on showing questions of safety, sexual safety. So if you see someone on porn like hooking up for the first time, but then they go grab a condom, that's like, hey, this is educational, or questions that can be more subtle, like asking for consent, or negotiating the kind of sex or a scene if we are going into more like kinky terms. That's already showing you something that perhaps you can do, or even porn that shows people just being goofy, about like, I don't know, like trying to be super sexy, but then just like hitting it, missing it, and so on. I think that's also something that can be also educational in the sense that it's like kind of like telling you, hey, you know what? Sex, which is something that can make many people really insecure, and self-conscious, and many people to be like very perfectionist about it. It's like, hey, this is not perfect. You can take things lightly, and then you can do yourself a favor. Or sex or porn work that also shows how the bodies or the ways of feeling pleasure from more marginalized bodies or identities, like something that puts like these kind of things are often ignored, on screen and so on, can also like help you understand, how other bodies work, how female pleasure works, how queer sex work, how people of the most diverse type of people can experience pleasure, or how can they have sex and so on. And I think that when you are expanding your horizons in those ways, you're already learning, And there's also pornographies that deal with more political matters, on a more explicit way and so on. And sex is also politics, so that's also something that we can be learning there. So I think that anything that it kind of with the right eagerness, or just with the eagerness to have a certain amount of critical skills, with the eagerness to understand how multidimensional and complex can pornography be. I think that that's when many people can start learning, about things. And perhaps not only watching the good conscious films, but also watching the things that maybe should not be anymore, like from the part of like saying, oh my God, like I disagree with this because this is like the typical hetero white masculine fantasy, that it's things that maybe should not exist anymore. I think at the moment that we think about these things and we decide, okay, maybe this is not okay, I think this is also a learning process, so yeah, I think there's a lot that.
Yeah, there's really a lot, and I think that's awesome what you just said and the examples that you told us. And I didn't know many of them, like all of them, so that was really helpful for me as well. So I learned a lot.
Yeah,
I think, as you said, with an open mind, you can learn a lot from those like videos or whatever. And you can learn a lot what you like and what you don't like, maybe. And I think that's
exactly.
even perfect. If I know, okay, I watch this and I don't like it, then I don't have to do it. So I think that's also like exploring your own body and exploring what you like or don't like. It's great for that.
Yes.
And maybe you, because you're also an educator at Sex School Hub, maybe
Mhm.
you can like tell us a little bit about Sex School Hub, what it is, and I learned it from you. So please tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. Okay. Sex School Hub, it's a platform that was founded by Anarela Martinez, who is a producer and cultural entrepreneur, and Poppy Sanchez, who is a very talented porn director. And they both came together with the idea of making films that are educational and explicit at the same time. So what we're talking about here is like explicit sex education. Um, and then they brought together a group of porn performers and sex workers and also certified sex educators, with the purpose of all of us bringing our own experiences and knowledge and putting them into films. So with this, sex school idea is to create not only like this kind of like boring manuals, about or not even boring, but I would say like sometimes you just read things or see like images and so on, and it's kind of difficult, to relate to them or to say, oh, how can I apply this, to my real life? So with Sex School, what we wanted to do is to create films that are educational, yes, but also approachable. That you see them, that it's like, okay, like this is something that I can do, you know. And also films that look good. Poppies has like a very distinct vision, you know, so it's also something we want to do films that also look pretty, you know, and that yeah. So in this sense, like this is the vision of Sex School. Uh, in the platform, sometimes you can read like some articles. The platform also offers some porn films and explains like what kind of things can you learn, you know, from a specific film. Um, and the main thing that we do is this films. Sometimes most of them are explicit, and we also have shorter clips in which we explain like, a specific topic. We recently shot our most recent season, and then we did many different we explored many different topics that many people were curious about, such as libido, you know, or um, sexting, for example, or anal sex. You know, topics that many people were curious and were already asking us to develop, and then we just went and did it, like sex positions, for example, and yeah, and many
Yeah.
more that are coming really soon.
I love it. And I think on the website it was like, we don't use bananas or so. And I was
No,
like, I
no.
love that. I love that because in school you always like had like bananas and condoms and then you know what to do. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that's like I love that as well because I think that's so important. Would you say that because I don't know, the target group probably is more like, I don't know, above 20, I would
Yeah,
say. I don't know. You can
definitely.
like, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Would you say there should be a sex school hub or something differently, like for children to educate them earlier? Like, yeah, better
Yeah,
than in
yeah.
school with bananas?
100%. I think that, as I said before, I think that we all are um, sexual creatures, you know, that I think that we live our own sexualities. What it doesn't, you don't need to be sexually active, so to speak, so to be able to experience your own sexuality, you know. So I do think that sex education can happen at all ages, you know. I think sex education is especially important, you know, even in the most tender ages, uh, because I mean, I think like those years sometimes you can be the most vulnerable, you know, when it comes to sex and sexuality, most vulnerable to abuse and all those things. So actually, education is something important to protect yourself. Um, Sex school for the moment because it is sexually explicit, you know, because also our experiences and areas of expertise, so to speak, of our team relate more to adult life, adult situations, and so on. So for now, we're focused there, but definitely, and that's something that Anarela has said in the many occasions in the past. One of her dreams is actually to be able to adapt this to younger audiences, you know. Perhaps, of course, like for that, you need to make it appropriate, you know, and perhaps you will not go and offer sexually explicit content, but definitely age appropriate content, age appropriate conversations, and so on.
Yeah, perfect. As I told you before, I think that we had a lot of problems with social media. We got banned. We got like
I hear
we
you.
cannot do
Okay.
marketing on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Hmm.
And I think you know how that
Yes.
works or how that don't work.
Yeah.
When because we work with different NFT projects or other communities, especially around the globe and in the United States as well. And we saw some of them who were like, "Oh, it's about sexuality. Um, we don't want to work with you." In Germany,
Hmm.
they're different. I think they are more open. That's my view. Than
Hmm.
United States, for example.
Hmm.
And I thought, why? or I think it's also educational wise in America, but maybe from your point of view, because you're in Berlin and you started here, how
Hmm.
would you see like the porn industry or in general the sexuality topic in Germany? Would you say it's
Hmm.
more open than in different in other countries, or how do you see that?
I think it is very difficult. It can be really difficult everywhere, you know. And I think that in many ways for us, and we depend a lot on communities, you know, and where the communities are. So I don't know. Maybe if I lived in Germany, but if I didn't live in Berlin, if I left some in a small town or something like that, then I will be telling you a very different story. Um,
Probably.
Yes, I think that in many ways there will always be people and there will always be communities or even individuals more in more isolated places that are eager, you know, to explore questions of pornography, eager to do work, you know, in one way or another, or to deal with these topics. But I think that in many ways also legislations play a big role, you know. So, for example, I think that in Berlin we are extremely, and I think in Germany we are like extremely lucky, you know, to come with a scene that is strong, you know, with with many people that come here, you know, or that are eager to come here, with a festival that in many ways like attracts many people, you know, to Berlin and kind of like brings people together and so on. So in many ways we are very lucky to count with that. But when it comes with to other questions, you know. I think that matters of policies and legislation can play a very, very restrictive and I would say, without exaggerating, evil role, you know, in how like certain communities can like even survive, you know, or certain projects can like have certain can live for longer. Like I think that well, in Germany with the like the laws are getting more and more restrictive. You know, in the U.S. it has that has also been the case, and the porn communities and so on have also been working really hard in defending themselves. You know, and trying to find a way to go through like out of all these legislations that unfortunately like certain many things that happen in the U.S. can also have like an effect on the rest of the world, you know. Decisions that companies like Visa or MasterCard can make, they have an impact, a global impact, you know. Um, so I think that because of all of these decisions, they do have a spillover effect, you know. All of these decisions affect people like us to be able to do marketing on social media, for example. Decisions like this, for example, in the case of the UK or London, for example, they have people, they leave people without spaces, you know, for the London Porn Film Festival, like the very last edition had really big troubles, you know, because of all these questions of legislation and people reporting them to the cops and so on, that they decided to make a pause, you know. Even some parties, sex positive parties, that can happen in Berlin, but in the UK, they not too long ago they really had to go to some sort of legal battles or some kind of like council protests to be able to exist. So I just think that everywhere in the world there will be like mentalities that are far more conservative and are like more about prohibition, but there will always be like people and communities eager to explore like these matters or or that are more like pro freedom of expression in these ways. But even with these two coexisting, I will say that sometimes it's even can make certain communities thrive or die. It goes higher to who makes the rules, who enforces them, and all these things.
Yeah, totally. I think you said it perfectly. Berlin is maybe one of the like the capital of Germany, but also like the capital of pleasure
Exactly.
and porn and whatever. I think when you go outside of Berlin, it's maybe different. But
Hmm.
I think it's also because of law and the registration and education as well that it's
Yeah,
totally different in different countries. And I think
yeah,
yeah, we have to like step back and see how it goes there, and then we have to adjust it. I think it's also one
exactly.
point. Yeah. As the Female Pleasure Society is also about sexual health and pleasure, how would you describe pleasure for you? Like, Do you have a definition of pleasure?
That's a very important question. I'm not exactly sure how will I define pleasure. I think that um, pleasure definitely is something multidimensional, you know. I think it's something that expands beyond whatever nice feelings you can have, you know. It goes beyond the genitals. It pleasure, I think that happens first and foremost in our biggest sexual organ, which is our brain, you know. So I think that it is something that has to, um, how can I say? I think
It's a
pleasure
really
is
tough
some.
question,
It's a
I think.
very
Yeah.
tough,
I
yes,
love the question because I always like I ask everybody who comes into our
yeah.
Twitter spaces. So, what is your definition about pleasure? Because I don't think that there is any definition. I think everyone can
No,
identify themselves with it and
yeah.
define their own pleasure
They
route
found
or
their
whatever.
own. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think in many ways it's an expense. Now that I think about it, it's an expensive experience of well-being, you know.
Mhm.
I think pleasure in so many ways is not only about like these physical sensations, it has to do also with a sense of safety, you know, that I think that safety for many people maybe do not feel pleasure because they do not feel safe, you know, and because maybe well-being it's something that for many people can come easy, but from others it's difficult for many other reasons, you know. And I think it's also a kind of a moment, you know, in which you are okay with yourself, you know, or okay with whatever it is happening to you at that time, you know. And
Wow, I
and yeah.
love that. Yeah. What you said about like that it happens in the brain, and that it's kind of
Yes.
a self-love thing,
Yes.
and that you have to like find it in yourself, and that you can like also be safe, which is so important in like
Hmm.
every situation, but especially with your partner or during sex, you have to communicate. I think that's important. And as you said, if you're safe, then you can like feel pleasure in any kind of situation, not only in sex. So I really love that spontaneous definition you used. Thank you,
Thank
Lina.
you.
So I said in our intro, like in our talk before the recording, that
Hmm.
I asked the community, our
Hmm.
community, some questions, or they wanted to ask questions to you. So
Hmm.
because we are a community first project, I said here you can ask anything, and therefore I picked three questions for you.
Perfect.
So how would you like describe or how is your pleasure in work different than your private pleasure? If there is any like difference.
Hmm. Well, I think it's very different. It is very different. I think that, and I will dare to say that for many people, even though like you can do a film and in which the orgasms are real and so on, the kind of sex that you can have in front of the camera, it's can be very different from the sex that you have in your private life. And it's not about, it's first and foremost because like every kind of sex is performative. Um, Even the sex that people have like in private is performative because like many people, everyone I think like has sex according to specific amount of codes, you know, or like conventions, so to speak. So all of it is performative. But I think that in many ways the kind of sex that I have in front of the camera, it's something that I am more it's more, let's say, and I don't mean it in a bad way. I think it's more goal oriented, you know. And in many ways, it can sometimes even be easier than the sex that you have in private, because if the kind of if you're going to a scene, you know, if you know your job is to look good on camera, to look like you're enjoying yourself, you know, and yeah, and in so many ways have fun. So if you're having a good day, you know, or if you are having you're working with a colleague with whom you have chemistry, or you're doing a type of scene that you're like personally excited about, it's just like, okay, well, just go there, do your thing, have fun. If you can come for real, it's perfect. If not, well, doesn't matter. So in that sense, pleasure can be real, chemistry can be real, and the fun can be real, but it's not exactly what perhaps I will do in my private life. I think
Yeah.
that sometimes, and I would say like it's always easier on camera than in private, because of course like the experiences that you can have on camera can be really different and multiple and so on, as like the experiences that you can have in your real life. I think that sometimes uh, in your private life maybe I don't know. I think that in many ways, like sex can be more. No, it's definitely more diverse, and because it's less marked by this goal-oriented type of performance, so to speak. So it can be far more. I don't know, ups and downs, goes well, doesn't go well, like you have to communicate differently, all these things. So in many ways it can be really really incredible and good and intense, or it can be boring, but yeah, it has a complexity of real life, let's just say.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you said it's like a performance in the end, and it can be
Yes.
it's totally different, like work from it, because it is a work in the end,
Mhm.
and that it's different from work and pleasure, from work and private, of course, and also that pleasure doesn't mean orgasm. Like
Exactly.
it means like having fun or being free, like enjoying yourself and enjoying as well, like
Exactly.
the work or in private, whatever that means. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, really interesting.
Thanks.
And maybe one other question.
Hmm.
Like, did you experience some stages in your life where you had some problems with your libido? That doesn't mean like it's related to your work. It's just like a
Hmm.
private question because we have a mood and sexuality booster who increases
Hmm.
libido. Because many women suffer from that, and you don't have to share if you don't want to. But that
Hmm.
was a question from our community because if so, what did you do, and how like did you overcome those situations? Or yeah, maybe you can, because you
Yeah.
talk so openly about everything.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, because that's also really interesting for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think I can definitely think of an example. I think libido it's a very, very broad concept, almost as broad as pleasure, but definitely something that I can talk about was about like orgasms. Once now that we talk about libido, uh, I think that in my early years, I have. I mean, in general, for me to be able to have an orgasm when being penetrated, I really need to stimulate my clitoris from the outside. And in my very baby years, for me, that was something that, even though, and that's a very funny thing, like even though when I did masturbate, I was able to reach orgasms and so on. Whenever I was with a partner, with a penis, and I was like having penetration and so on, I wasn't able to reach an orgasm, and it was just like it was just there the facts, but I was, because of the lack of information that I have, because of the, as I told you how terrible my sex education was, I wasn't able to connect like these two things. And for some time, I even thought that I was even unable, to reach. I was like, oh my God, maybe I am anorgasmic. Like this thing, I heard that exists. Maybe that's like, So it took me like a really long time, because I had like, I was, for example, convinced in my mind that I was like supposed to come only from penetration. And if not, then that was like something. I was, yeah, sorry, like bad luck. So, so in that sense, that kind of like definitely that had an impact, in how I saw myself, or how I saw my sex life, in the sense of like, okay, there is something missing, that's like it feels good up to a certain point, and then like after that, it's like it feels like I'm always like the one kind of like not getting as much fun as the other partner, So it was uh like exploring a bit, touching myself a little bit more, understanding certain things that I was able to understand that, okay, like how I was able to enjoy myself, whilst whilst being penetrated, and eventually was like, oh, now I know. I mean, like, oh, I can actually touch myself, And then it was like, okay, like now this feels good. Now I'm enjoying this, the penetration even more, Now this feels a little bit more like the whole package, so to speak. And it's something that can sound like really, I mean, right now it's just like, okay, it's just there. But back then it took me, for me, it was a whole like process, to be able to connect like these two different things, and just and to understand a little bit about myself. And for me,
Yeah.
it was like crazy, because it's just about like the kind of sex education you receive, and everything is just like so centered, on masculine pleasure, that I was just enjoying myself, and I was just capable of all these many things, but I was just like not able to see it, because I didn't have the adequate resources to put two and two together, basically.
Yeah, so happy that you mentioned that, because that's so true. Everything is around like, yeah, masculine and and male perspective.
Uh-huh.
Because you're not alone. I think many people like think about that, and don't know their body and don't know what they like, and don't have like the opinion or the mind to like change that. And I think that's really really good that you shared that.
Hmm.
And I think that's also good what you're doing with tech school help and with the porn you do, that we like learn that it's also that it can or should be also around women, and about their pleasure, and or like in general diversity means a lot
Hmm.
in this case. Maybe one last question of the
Yeah.
conversation, because our project is also about sexual health. Um, do you have like some tips or something that you can share with us, or that you do around your sexual health, sexual tips, sexual wellness, something you do about that, your daily life, or whatever that comes into your mind when you think about sexual health?
Hmm. Well, I think that one of the things that I do, I have the habit of getting tested for STDs. I think this is something that people can do more often, and can like that it will be everyone will be like really get like it helps everyone, to normalize the fact of getting tested, of knowing your status, of knowing that um, getting tested for STDs is not only about anyone's level of promiscuity, I mean, you don't have that, just you don't have to be a slut, you have to need to get tested, it's always a healthy habit, to be able to do it yourself, to discuss it with your partners, to have conversations about it, and just like make it a habit. And it's not about the stigma that comes with having an STD, if that happens at all, because I think that in so many ways people don't do it because of how stigmatized they can be. That's one tip. Another one, I regularly, I mean, some days more than others, but every now and then, I always like to have like some how is it? Oh my God, what's the name in English? Probiotics, vaginal
Hmm.
probiotics. That's something that I always like to keep in my fridge for every now and then. It's something that it's just not. It's good to have around, like some. Uh, my vagina, like many others, they're not like all the same all the time. Sometimes they fall out of balance and so on, and then you can give yourself a help, and that's also something that is just normal and fine and perfectly okay. What else? I personally like also to drink a lot of water, when it comes before shooting and so on, because it helps a lot with lubrication. in my case. So so yeah, that's also like a habit that I have. Also going and try to pee right after having sex, to prevent any kind of like UTIs or things like that. That's something also that I'm very much used to doing. And other than that, it's also trying always to have at hand like places or resources where whenever I have like more questions or like whenever I have like certain concerns about my health and my sexuality, I think something really important is to not to be ashamed of asking questions or asking for help if you feel that something is could be not working okay. And at the same time, I think it's very important to be prepared for the fact that even medical professionals can sometimes even be biased, uh, about people, about sex and sexuality. So, for example, if you go one day to the doctor and so on, and the doctor makes a comment that it's kind of that you feel that in one way or another shames you for your choices about whether it is sexual habits, sexuality, or even your choice for having children or not, or things like that. I think it's very important to understand that to not let potential bad experiences to discourage you or to think bad things about yourself.
Yeah. Well, that was so helpful that you shared that with us, especially your habits with drinking water, which is basically really important for everything. But also like pee after sex, and I think that's it's really helpful for everyone who can like yeah, try to learn
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
Um, Lina, it was so awesome to have you. I think we learned so much about like in the
Thank
past
you so
hour.
much.
I
Mhm.
cannot believe that it's already an hour.
Me
Thank you
neither.
for sharing personal stories as well as your experience and your pros and cons of the porn performance and as well as what we can like do about it and how we can educate ourselves, which is basically the most important thing to learn. Where can people find you? Like, maybe you can share a little bit where I
Mhm.
found you and
Yes.
where other people can find you.
Okay, I think the first and easiest entry point is social media. I am either on Twitter or on Instagram as Lina Bembe altogether. Uh, yeah, I think that's a very entry point. I have a link there, and that's where people can find more details about my films. I have an OnlyFans that I also nurture on a regular basis, and I also have affiliate links to some of my favorite people that I have worked with. And also on sexschoolhub.com, it's also like our films, more on the educational side of things. And yeah, everything you need to know, I think the best is just hit on social media, hit on that link tree, and then you can just choose anything that tickles your curiosity.
Yes, everyone who listens, go follow Lina because you learn a lot.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here, Lina. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too.
And yeah, have a great day.
So do you.